Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good week so far. We're just going to give it 30 more seconds to allow some late joiners. Maybe they're just grabbing their coffee or finishing making their cup of tea before joining this morning's session. So let's give that 20, 30 more seconds. Whilst we wait for them, feel free to say hello, who you are, where you're dialing in from. It's always really interesting to learn where people are in the UK. Last week we had people from Cornwall all the way up to I think around like Newcastle, so different parts of the UK. Perhaps you're the closest to us here in London. I'm sat in one room, Alina's sat in a booth not too far from the office. Just going to again just give that 10 seconds. I can see hi Hazel, West Yorkshire. I hope you're doing well. Hi Claire, how's it going? Awesome. Well, I can see a few more people now have joined. A few more people saying hello as well. Tanaka, hi from Coventry, Chichester, London, Leicester, all over the UK, which is really exciting. Cool. So let's now jump into it. So welcome everyone. This is Home Office Compliance, all around surviving a home office audit, and this is, I believe, our third webinar of our August series. So we're going to be looking at what a home office audit looks like and how to pass them. For those who do know me, I apologize. For those who don't, my name is William Murch and I'm Head of Partnerships here at Borderless. And we're joined by one of our senior immigration advisors today, Alina. I'm not sure if you want to say a quick hello, Alina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alina. I'm a senior immigration advisor here at Borderless. I've been here for almost 2 years. I think you might recognize my face from previous webinars, but I'll be supporting on the chat as well with any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you, Alina. And again, you may have bumped into me at the Care Road shows or even the Care Show. And if anyone here is going to the Care Show in October, feel free to come and say hello to us in person. And also just want to say, finally, we are joined by Prashanth at the Borderless team, who's supporting by moderating today. So yeah, if you do have any questions throughout the session, feel free to put them in the chat. And we're just going to come on to some housekeeping about that shortly as well. And just quickly want to talk about our mission, why we are here. But essentially, we started Borderless to create a world where borders are no longer barriers and anyone can move anywhere seamlessly and safely. So everything that we've built is in service of that, including making compliance something you stay on top of rather than something that catches you out. But what does this really mean for you? Essentially, we're just looking to simplify the concept of immigration for both you as businesses and for your sponsored workers. Cool. Before we jump into it, just keeping, feel free to ask Q&A throughout the session. Alina, Prashanth, or myself will try and get to them as we go through. However, we will have some dedicated time at the end. So if you're not thinking of questions throughout, please don't worry. We're going to have 5-10 minutes at the end. Again, chat with us. It makes it a lot more exciting for us and hopefully everyone else when you're using the chat. So again, thanks to everyone that said good morning. Kay, Charlotte, Sheila, Catherine, morning everyone. And then finally, this session will be recorded. So no need to jot down lots of notes or try to capture everything in real time. This will be published to YouTube so you can watch it at your own speed. Cool. And to keep everyone on their toes, we're actually going to kick off with a poll. And it would be really interesting to know, we're all here to learn about home office audits, what they look like and how to best pass them. But, if you were honest, if a home office auditor walked in tomorrow, maybe without giving you the heads up, how ready would you say you are? So I'm just going to push this poll out. And again, it really helps set the scene for the rest of today's session. It's going to let that run for a minute, and I can already see some answers coming in. We're seeing a real mix of a few organizations and people who are ready, which is really positive. Some who are not ready, some are not even sure what they'd be asking for. You know, we talk to organizations like that a lot, especially if you're newer to sponsorship, maybe if you've never had an audit before. But it does seem like the majority of people are falling into, they're somewhat mostly ready for a home office audit, but there would be gaps. And I think this is where, you know, everyone typically does fall. And even for those who say they're completely ready, you know, after doing a mock audit or really diving deeply into the documents, we always find some gaps. And given that home office compliance and what they might be asking for does constantly evolve and change, you could have been ready a year ago, but there's, you know, a new documents that maybe you need to track which you aren't, which makes those gaps really real. Of course, I'm just going to end that poll now. As we can see, you know, the people here today are across all different varying degrees of readiness when it comes to home office audits. So hopefully everyone should be able to take away some value in the session. And off the back of that, I think we're just going to do the agenda and then we'll dive into it. So here's how the next 30 to 45 minutes is going to run. So we're really going to be looking at the changing immigration landscape and how lots of this has been feeding into an increase of home office audits and unfortunately sponsor license revocations. Off the back of that, I'll be then handing over to Alina to talk about your compliance duties and potential traps to look out for, you know, just those things that might fall through the cracks. Finally, we'll be going on to audits, you know, what they look like and what to expect, and then into how to prepare and stay audit ready. And then we'll be wrapping up with a Q&A. So again, feel free to ask questions throughout the session. But if you did want to save it to the Q&A, you can as well. So without further ado, let's look at the changing immigration landscape and why compliance matters more than it used to. You know, compliance expectations have risen sharply and enforcement with them. You know, the Home Office treats a sponsor license as something you actively maintain, not something you hold passively. And I can show you exactly what's changed shortly, what it looks like in our numbers and what it means for your team day to day. But here's the chart, which we really think encompasses most of the changes we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months. As you can see, you know, sponsor license revocations have, you know, almost 10x'd since 2021. You can see that revocations were quite low, 2021, 2022, and even 2023 by modern standards, you know, averaging, you know, anywhere between 300 to 700 revocations a year. But over the last 18 to 24 months, what we've seen is a real uptick in audits and revocations. So you can see 2024, there's a big increase. Again, 2025, it doubled. And this year, based off of the figures from the first 3 months of the year, we're anticipating about 6,200 sponsor license revocations. And you know, off the back of this is obviously a lot more enforcement and a lot more scrutiny by the Home Office. And there's roughly 120,000 sponsor license holders. So you can imagine 5% of all sponsor license holders this year might end the year without their license. So you've got 1 in 20 chance there. What we've done here at Borderless is actually map this across the UK, you know, and saying where they were from in the chat earlier, you know, every revocation, you know, the revocations happen across the UK. So every red dot here is a sponsor license where the Home Office has revoked the sponsor license. So this isn't just happening in one region, in one place. This is happening across England and the UK. You can see, you know, hubs of revocations in places like Birmingham, London, Bristol, Leeds, up in Newcastle, and it really does just mirror where sponsor license holders are in the UK. But what does this mean for you? It plays out really in 2 columns. First of all, the reality, you know, regular requests for documents, more tracking of who's on what visa and which conditions apply, data sitting across different systems, and a lot of it handled manually. But the impact of all of this is, you know, a real heavy burden and load for your team, risk of missing deadlines are always changing, compliance that's strong in some places but patchy in others, which could lead to downgrades or fines, and ultimately an exposure when an audit comes. So that's the problem we're seeing at the moment. The rest of the session is about closing it and supporting you in tackling the problem head on. I'm going to start exactly where your duties are. And now I'm just going to hand over to Alina to talk about duties and what the Home Office expects day to day. So Alina, if you just let me know when you want me to shift through the slides.
Perfect. So I guess Will has kind of laid down the landscape in terms of what the Home Office are looking for. So now we'll get into what the Home Office expects you to do on a day-to-day basis, just to ensure that you are being as compliant as possible with your license as well. And the next section will essentially cover who's responsible, the 4 core duties, and exactly what needs to be reported and when as well. So Will, if you could just move to the next slide, please.
Also, I'm just seeing some people in the chat saying they can't see the slides. We can see them on our side. Can other people just confirm that they can see them? If not, I can stop sharing and share again. Oh, yep. Okay, lots of people can see it. So for those that can't, maybe leave the webinar, rejoin, because the majority of people can. So it might just be a technical problem on your side. Thank you, everyone, for confirming so quickly. So over to you again. Sorry, Lena.
Okay, perfect. So in this section, what we're going to cover is essentially what is Home Office compliance and who is responsible. So the definition of Home Office compliance is basically the legal duties that a UK organization immediately takes on the moment they apply for a sponsor license. So from the moment that you've applied, you need to show that you're aware of these duties, you understand what needs to be in place within your organization to ensure that you are being as compliant as possible from the moment the license is approved. So this applies whether you're currently sponsoring workers or not. So it applies the same way to workers who are migrant workers that are currently doing supplementary hours with yourselves as well. And we're also going to be talking about who's responsible for overall compliance. And I think it's really important to point out that it's not one person's duty. When a company does take on and obtains a sponsor license, the organization itself is committed to compliance. So it's a group effort in terms of the authorizing officer, any HR or recruitment members, as well as senior management. So typically the authorizing officer is the named individual who is accountable for compliance and is usually the main contact within the Home Office. So typically when you are audited by the Home Office, the caseworker from the Home Office will be mostly speaking to the authorizing officer throughout the day, but that doesn't mean that other teams within the company are not as involved in terms of compliance. So this is where your HR teams, your recruitment teams, they need to be aware of the compliance duties as well. And this is usually typically in terms of conducting right-to-work checks on time before employment begins, ensuring that your record keeping is up to date with any changes in your current workforce as well, and also just making sure that you are aware of all the changes that need to be reported so that you can feed that back to your level 1 users or your authorizing officer who will then action it on the SMS essentially. And the same applies for senior management. So if they're not already listed as a level 1 user on the SMS, they would need to be aware of the duties as well so that they can feed them back to any key personnel on the license to ensure that everything is reported within the correct time frame as well. Will, if you can move to the next slide, please. Perfect. And here we're going to cover the 4 core duties that you need to be aware of if you are a sponsor license holder. And in our experience, we do see that a lot of audit failures or potential revocations or suspensions usually trace back to one of these 4 duties. So it's really important to just make sure you're aware of them as well to hopefully avoid that outcome during an audit. So the first one being record keeping. So it's really important to make sure that you obtain and retain all of the documents related to each sponsored worker for as long as the guidance requires. So that means that even after a worker has left your company or sponsorship is terminated, you will need to retain copies of those files pertaining to that worker for at least a year after to ensure that in the event that the Home Office audits you later on within the next 12 months, you do have records of a previous leaver who was a migrant worker as well. And in terms of record keeping and the kinds of documents that the Home Office does look for, they do look for employment contracts, ensuring those are signed, ensuring that any clauses within those contracts are consistent with your duties as a sponsor as well. So typically for care homes, that's ensuring that if travel time applies, that is paid, and that is also stated in your contract. And just overall ensuring that if there are any promotions throughout a sponsored worker's career with you, that there are variation letters and updated contracts and just internal logs that reflect their whole history of employment with yourself as well. And moving on to the second one, monitoring and reporting. So with monitoring and reporting, this is particularly important for the migrant workers as well. It's really important that you are aware that anytime a change happens, especially a reportable change on the SMS, that must be reported within 10 working days of the change happening for migrant workers specifically. And the Home Office, I will say, have cracked down on this a lot more recently, where previously where late reporting was acceptable, or they may turn a blind eye to late reporting as long as you have reported it. Now I'm seeing that they are quick to issue revocations or suspensions where there has been continuous late reporting. So it's really important to make sure that you are adhering to this timeline as well. And just moving swiftly on to the third one, which is notifying changes to the Home Office. This particularly relates to business changes. So anything in terms of a change of ownership within the company, that needs to be reported within 20 working days. So anything related to business changes, whether it's a change in address or a change in the company name or registrable status, anything related to the business itself needs to be reported within 20 working days. And I will say, particularly where there is a change in ownership, those are slightly more complex, and there's usually more steps that need to be taken other than just simply reporting. So it's really important that if you think you've gone through a change in ownership or are potentially about to go through a change in ownership, that you speak to an immigration consultant just to make sure that the next steps are ready to be actioned once you've reported it as well. And lastly, the key personnel. So that kind of ties in to the previous slide about how essentially it is a group effort. So as much as the authorizing officer is responsible, the key personnel are responsible as well. So that's people that are listed as level 1 or level 2 users on your SMS, as well as any key contacts as well. So anybody listed on the SMS should be aware of the duties and keep up to date in terms of the current guidance as well. And Will, if you could move to the next slide, please. Perfect. Here, so we've just given you a brief summary of changes that must be reported on the SMS. So firstly, a change in authorizing officer or key contact. It's really important that once a key personnel has left the business is quick to action these changes, because essentially you don't want a situation where the Home Office does come and audit your business and a key personnel is listed on the license who is not present on the day because they've left the business as well. So it's really important to make sure anything listed on your SMS is up to date as well. Secondly, adding or removing a branch or a site. This is particularly important when you're assigning a cause as well, because you want to make sure that the work location listed on the assigned COS is actually accurate to where the worker will be carrying out their day-to-day responsibilities. Thirdly, changes to business, or so things like changes to your registered address, changes to your business size, which could affect the amount of immigration skills charge you're paying when you're assigning a cause. So that kind of ties into the change in sponsor size as well. And any major business event. So this kind of ties back to what I alluded on to earlier, which is a change in ownership. So that can be any major business event, such as a takeover, acquisition, a share purchase, or just a liquidation as well. And lastly, surrendering or requesting for your license to be made dormant. This particularly ties in hand in hand with any major business event. So it's really important to just keep track of all of these changes and note that these need to be reported within 20 working days, because these are business changes particularly. Will, if you could move to the next slide, please. Perfect. So in an effort to make things easier, we've tried to create a list that basically covers everything that needs to be reported and when it needs to be reported. So it covers both business and migrant worker changes as well. So I'm just going to leave this on for a few seconds just so everybody can download that and have that on hand as well. I believe it is on our website as well. So if you do miss this, you do have an opportunity to get this later on as well.
Prashant has just shared it in the chat, so the link is there for everyone that needs it.
Amazing. Okay, and now we're just going to put out a quick poll just to understand how everybody is managing compliance today. Okay, so I can see some answers coming in. A few people currently use spreadsheets. Some have no tracking system, which I'm slightly concerned about. Some use their own HR system, external solicitors, and we have some people here that use Borderless, so that's great. I will say, though, there are a lot of people that use spreadsheets, and my personal opinion on that, I don't particularly think that that is the best way to track compliance, just because I will cover this later on in a few examples as well, but I have seen instances where people have been using spreadsheets historically, and while that is manageable with a smaller sponsored workforce, as your sponsored workforce continues to grow, I will say it will get harder to track that on a spreadsheet, so just keep that in mind as well. Perfect. We can leave that up for maybe another 10 seconds or so. Yeah, I can see the majority of people here are using spreadsheets. And yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I think obviously we run lots of these polls, don't we, Alina? And we do see like spreadsheets like the most popular ways.
Yeah.
Especially if people don't have like a system in place that they use. Obviously, we know that's got its problems as well. But I think I'm more worried about maybe the one or two people that maybe just have
no tracking system. Yeah.
Which is crazy, but also great that you're here to learn about how you might want to proactively track it going forward.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect. If we can move to the next slide, Will. Amazing. Okay, so now we just have a quick video to show you essentially how you can manage compliance using Borderless, because we've introduced a new feature called Halo. Just bear with me while I try to play that.
Content.
Halo is a brand new compliance product from Borderless. It gives you a single view of your compliance position across your entire business, including your compliance score, workers by status, any document compliance gaps, the status and remaining COS on your sponsor licenses, any changes that you need to report to the Home Office that have been flagged by Halo, and a single action that you can take per document to fill any compliance gaps. Take employment details, for example. You've got the ability to audit job descriptions across your entire workforce or even on an individual basis. We'll show you the information that we've extracted from that employee's COS and allow you to reuse that on the Borderless platform. If you need to fill any payslip gaps, you can use our smart document uploader, which will allow you to upload as many documents as you need. We'll extract information from those documents, match them against the individuals, and then we'll tell you if there are any compliance gaps that have been found in those documents. Thank you.
Amazing. So that's just a brief look into some of the features that we have at Borderless and how we can essentially make managing compliance easy for yourselves as well. So feel free to get in touch with us if that's something you're interested in. Will, if you can move to the next slide. Perfect. So now we're going to transition to the next section, which is essentially where compliance breaks down and what we often see through helping our customers with audits and just having mock audits as well to ensure that ahead of any home office visit, our customers are as compliant as they possibly can be. So Will, if you can move to the next slide. Perfect. So here we'll be covering the four main reasons we see that, the most common reasons we see there that compliance breaks down essentially. So firstly, missing right to work checks. So with this, what we often see is that sometimes right to work checks are not done compliantly, which means that they're often conducted once the migrant worker has begun working already, which would be classified as non-compliant in the Home Office's eyes, because you would need to conduct that before the worker has started their employment to establish that the worker is not illegally working. So even if you are sponsoring the worker and the worker has told you that their leave is granted until 2028, for example, you will need to carry out a right to work check by asking them to generate a share code to yourselves. And then you'll then need to confirm that and retain a record of that check on your internal systems as well to show compliance when the Home Office does audit you as well. Secondly, failure to track visa expiry. So this kind of ties into how you're tracking and monitoring compliance. So where I've seen personally where this tends to fail is mostly where companies are tracking visa expiries through a spreadsheet. Like I said, once their sponsored workforce continues to grow, it's often harder to track these dates. And also sometimes where a worker has been sponsored with your company for a while, simply not editing a field to update that visa expiry could lead to you missing that potential next expiry as well, and could also lead to illegal working, which could have more consequences for your business. And thirdly, inconsistent employee records. So I think with this, it's more common where a worker has been promoted and sometimes the documents or employment contracts don't match what the new updated COS is stating. So typically where a worker has transitioned from a carer to a senior carer, in those instances, a new cause is typically needed, and you would need to assign a new cause and apply for a new visa before that worker can start working. And often when I'm reviewing files, I'll see the outdated employment contract from 3 years ago when the worker is actually currently working as a senior carer, and that contract no longer reflects that role. So it's really important that you're constantly updating any records, making sure that everything is consistent as well. That means issuing variation letters or potentially just leaving a note on your file just acknowledging that this worker has transitioned to a new role or has taken on a new job title. And lastly, and potentially the most important one, I would say, are salary thresholds. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the changes that took place in April. So previously, where the Home Office was more lenient, I would say, salary used to be able to average out over an annual basis, and that's how the Home Office used to look at it. But with the changes that took place in April, the Home Office are cracking down on this a lot more, and they are becoming more and more strict. So previously, where it could average out over an annual basis, the Home Office are now looking at it based on your pay periods. So depending on how often you issue payroll and you pay your sponsored workers, different pay periods would apply. So the most common would be workers that are paid monthly. You would need to ensure that your workers meet the quarterly amount of salary that they're meant to get over a year. So you would need to make sure that with every pay period, they are passing that. And if for whatever reason they are not passing it due to statutory sick pay or maternity leave, all of these different changes need to be reported as well. So I guess that hopefully kind of shows you how all of these duties kind of tie into one another, and missing one could lead to you failing on another one of those duties as well. Perfect. Will, if you can move to the next slide. So here I'm going to be talking you through our first example, which is failure to track visa expiries and conditions. So I guess the scenario here is it could be that the company itself has no central tracking system or are currently tracking it on spreadsheets, something where there are no notifications actively popping up to the sponsor and the authorizing officer to let them know that this worker's visa is due to expire soon. And often what happens is, well, a few things could happen. It could be that you've missed the alert entirely and that worker continues working past when their visa has expired, which would constitute as illegal working. And the civil penalty for illegal working starts at £45,000 for the first penalty. And for any penalty after that, it could go up to £60,000 or potentially even more for any repeat offenders. So it's really important to understand that although these seem like small mistakes, they are really costly mistakes that could cause a business a lot of money. So it's really important to just ensure that you have systems in place to track all of this. And I guess another situation where this could fall apart as well is if, for example, the company does not have any remaining COSs to assign to the worker in time for their visa expiry. So it's really important to just make sure you're tracking all of these things so that if you don't have a remaining cause and that needs to be actioned on your SMS, the standard processing time right now for a cause request can take up to 8 to 12 weeks. So if you're looking at it in terms of a timeline, you would need to know that the worker's visa is expiring a few a few months before to ensure that you have all these steps in place to make sure that they're able to submit that application before the visa expires as well. Perfect. Will, if you could move to the next slide. So here with the second example, we're going to be talking about incomplete or inconsistent employee records. So I've kind of touched on this briefly in the previous slides. I think this applies mostly to people who have promotions or any changes in employment throughout their sponsorship. So it's just really important to make sure that if there are any increases in pay or any changes within the roles, there are proper documentation that will essentially show the whole history of employment that that worker has had with you so far. So that's like issuing variation letters, sending out formal emails to confirm that, you know, the salary has changed or the job title has changed as well. And it's just really important to make sure that all of this is stored in one place that the team has access to, so that if in the event that the Home Office does audit your company, that's easily accessible and the Home Office will be able to see it as well on your internal system, basically. Perfect. Now we're going to move on to the next section, which will cover any triggers and what the Home Office expects to see when they do audit yourself and the company as well. Perfect. Okay. So essentially, what is an audit? So there are two types of audits that the Home Office typically conducts. The first is a pre-license audit. I would say these are quite rare, and these usually happen at the stage that the company is applying for the sponsor license. So once they've submitted that application, the Home Office will then process the application, and they have the Home Office as well within their right to essentially ask for further documents or conduct a pre-license check. And this is usually done online with the authorizing officer. And the authorizing officer will then have to show their internal systems, their HR systems, how they're managing any migrant workers that are maybe working with them at the moment on a student visa, graduate visa, or dependent visa. And essentially, it usually happens for businesses that are under 6 months. So newer businesses that have just been incorporated, the Home Office will want to see that you have sufficient systems in place to ensure that you're set up well for when you do have the license. And the one that we see more commonly is a post-license audit. So that's typically where you've been granted the sponsor license, you've maybe had the license for a few years, and the Home Office will then conduct one of two checks. So it could be an email where they're asking you to send all of your payroll documents and any employment contracts. And usually when you do receive an email like this, you have around 20 working days to send any of the documents back to the Home Office. And alternatively, the one that I think is more scary is usually when the Home Office visits you in person at your business. So with these audits, the Home Office typically gives you some sort of warning that they're coming, and they'll let you know over email that they'll be visiting on this date at this time. And usually what they'll also do is they'll send a list of the sponsored workers that they expect to be present on the day so that they can conduct interviews with those workers as well. And yeah, I guess it's important to note that with the Home Office in-person visits, a lot of the times they are announced, but there are some times where it could be unannounced as well. So it's just really important to make sure your compliance is up to date throughout the whole history of you obtaining the license, basically. Perfect. Yeah. So now we're going to cover the four main things that we've seen that triggers a Home Office audit. So firstly, it could be non-compliance with any sponsorship duties. So that could be where the Home Office have maybe seen late reporting in the past, or where they've checked company's house and they've seen that there's maybe been a change in ownership and that's not been reported on the SMS. So that usually could trigger an audit. And that kind of ties into the reporting issues as well. So any late reporting outside of the 10 working day time frame for migrant workers and 20 working day time frame for any business changes as well. Thirdly, employment practices. So this could be where I think also it's important to note that the Home Office has access to a wider pool of information than we maybe think they do. So they often coordinate with HMRC and are able to see if there are any underpayments for migrant workers as well. If there's potentially any illegal working as well, that could trigger an audit. And lastly, any complaints or tip-offs. So it could be that a migrant worker has complained that they've been underpaid, or just outside third parties as well could complain. So it's just really important, again, to just make sure your compliance is as great as it could be. And if we can move on to the next slide. So just a few things to be aware of ahead of the audit day. So the Home Office would usually notify you of their intention to audit you. And what they'll do then is they'll send you an email with the date, the time, the employees that they expect to be present. Sometimes I have seen where they don't send over a list, but we can usually also recommend the customers to respond to that email and request for the names of the workers that they'd like to be present. You're within your rights to do that. They may also request documents ahead of the visit, which is completely normal. And like I said, on the day, they could be conducting interviews with multiple sponsored workers in your workforce. And sometimes what I've seen as well, where if they're not able to finish all of these interviews in a day, they may ask to come back the following week as well. But again, they will notify you of any of these dates as well. Perfect. And the next slide. So typically on the day, you can expect the visit to last kind of throughout the whole workday, so about 8 hours. The initial meeting would usually be held with the authorizing officer. Depending on the caseworker from the Home Office, they may allow other key personnel such as level 1 or level 2 users in the room as well. But what we've seen usually is that the caseworker from the Home Office will be spending most of their time with the authorizing officer, and they would expect the authorizing officer to have oversight over compliance over the entire business. Secondly, they will review documents. So that could be documents stored in your internal HR system, any system that you use to manage compliance. They may ask questions in terms of reporting and how often you do report any changes and whether you're aware of the timelines. They may ask to see timesheets or rotas as well, and they may also ask to see payroll records or just payroll RTI summary as well. So they could ask for all of this. So it's just really important to make sure that you do have all these documents easily accessible. And lastly, they will also interview key personnel and any employees as well. And now on to the next slide. So just a summary, I guess, of what the officer could focus on. Firstly, record keeping practices, which ties into, I think, the second section where I talked about how it's really important to make sure your record keeping is up to date. They may also ask to see HR systems in terms of how you're monitoring absences or holidays or annual leave. They may also ask to see the causes that you initially assigned to the worker to make sure that everything is up to date and their duties are in line with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They may ask for right to work checks. And also with the interviews, I will say what they're typically looking for when they're interviewing the sponsored workers is to make sure that the workers essentially have not bought a cause or paid for any of the fees that are typically employee costs and are not meant to be passed on to the employer. They may also ask the workers just general questions in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that their day-to-day responsibilities are accurate to the occupation code that was assigned to them on the cause. And they'll ask in terms of your awareness of your reporting duties, whether the key personnel listed on the SMS actually have oversight on the sponsored workers as well, and just any general compliance duties that they expect the authorizing officer to be aware of, basically. And I think that ends it for my section, Will.
Yeah, I think it is. Thank you so much, Alina. Hopefully everyone found that useful. I'm just going to have a quick look through the chat now. Maybe there's one or two things we can address.
Sorry,
Cool.
I've just seen a message from Abby where I think this is a good just note for everybody. We have been seeing lots of scams recently from the Home Office where they've stated that they're going to be conducting an audit for businesses. And I've personally emailed the Home Office about this. And I will say that the Home Office have said they will never ask any sponsor to log into the SMS as part of an email. And typically as well, when the Home Office does conduct an audit, they will conduct it quite shortly after that email is received. So you can expect about a week's notice. And with a lot of the scam emails I've seen, it's usually them saying that they'll conduct an audit 2 or 3 months ahead from that email. And that should usually raise some red flags that hopefully that's not a legitimate email as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Alina. Yeah, I can see a question from Lauren just asking around GDPR, uploading documents. So obviously the Borderless platform is built with the correct privacy settings in place to make sure it's GDPR compliant. And depending on your HR system, we can integrate. We can't integrate with all of them, but we can definitely integrate with some of them. And we've also got bulk upload features. So if you keep lots of your documents in a shared drive, in a Y drive, or if you downloaded them in bulk, you can just upload them with one click and wait a few moments for them to be uploaded. Hopefully that answers your question, Lauren. Okay, we're now just going to segue into the final section of today, section 5, how to prepare and stay audit ready. I think lots of what we see is building a system, building checklists, making things as simple as possible for yourselves really supports in being audit ready. You can almost think of it as a routine that keeps you audit ready. Whether or not a visit ever comes, you can start today rather than waiting for notice, such that if the day does come, you feel really confident. I think going into an audit feeling confident is half the battle. So what are the 6 steps which we think really support in ensuring that you're audit ready? First of all, is keeping your SMS current. It's probably the first thing that the Home Office checks and cross-references with all of the other documents you have and situation of your business, as Alina has mentioned. Secondly, audit employee records for completeness and accuracy. Take a subset of your sponsored workers. Perhaps you have 10, 15, 20, maybe take 2, 3, or 5, just to ensure that you've got really good coverage of all of the documents that you need. And again, double checking the accuracy. 3, if you're not already, or if you're using spreadsheets to track things like visa expiry dates and conditions across your workforce, maybe look to move to a more robust system. 4, complete and properly record every right to work check. Conducting a right to work check is a legal obligation, not even just for your sponsored workers, but for your whole workforce. Get this right, and it really starts to build the pillars of being compliant. 5, always make sure you're monitoring your salary against the sponsorship requirements. Make sure that this isn't going under the radar or falling below the thresholds because of some deductibles. And we see this quite often. And as you can imagine, I think, I can't recall which care roadshow I was at recently, but someone was telling me it's been roughly a week every single month across about 120 sponsored workers, ensuring that the salaries in a pay don't mean that they're non-compliant. So again, if you can build a system robustness around this, that really helps. And then finally, report changes to the Home Office on time. This is super simple to do, but obviously ensuring that you do it can be hard, especially if there's multiple people within your organization that touch sponsorship, or if things are constantly evolving as your organization is growing. But again, just getting these 6 core things right can really support you in your compliance journey. I'm just going to zoom now into some of the employee documents that you might have to have ready. If the Home Office does come to audit, or if you're just running a mock audit internally. Again, this isn't a fully exhaustive list, but gives you a flavor of what the Home Office might be asking for, and it includes things like ID documents, job application and recruitment records, right to work checks, as I mentioned, proof of address, absence records, employee reports, employment contracts, pay slips, payroll bank statements, rotas, risk assessments, and document retention for leavers. Do not forget your leavers. Again, we've got lots more blogs and checklists around this on the Borderless website if you want to know exactly what you need for each employee. And I guess the whole crux of this is moving from a situation and place where you don't feel confident, you feel worried about a potential upcoming Home Office audit, and you're feeling quite reactive, a place where you feel really confident, albeit not 100% confident, because I think you always want to keep some element of improvement, but that you are confident that if the Home Office were to come in, you've got the relevant documents across the relevant sponsored employees, and you have a centralized place where you're storing your Home Office compliance and staying up to date with your duties. And that if they were to come in, you'd be able to be calm, composed, and support the Home Office in answering the questions they have, and then pass with flying colors. Obviously, retaining your sponsor license. So I guess, the desired state for everyone here would be, that centralized compliance management, automated tracking alerts, real-time visibility across your workforce, and that audit ready at all times, especially with how many audits, revocations we're seeing. And back to our first point that we mentioned on, I think, slide 5 or 6, and this is exactly what we're aiming to build the best-in-class solution for here at Borderless. Already, we support 600 organizations with end-to-end support across work visas, sponsor licenses, settled hires, and work faster than solicitors. And we're a lot more transparent on our costs, and we really have built the platform to keep you compliant, underpinned by absolute experts like Alina, experts like Lowell, and the rest of the Borderless team here to make sure that as and when immigration changes and compliance duties are changing, they're represented in the Borderless platform. And what we really hear is that, Borderless is everything the Home Office can ask for in that one place. And we look to just, take away a lot of that stress and hassle for the things that can go wrong. Again, the platform is built to track visa expiries, right to work gaps, records scattered everywhere, and reporting deadlines that often get missed. And what we see across the cohort of organizations that use Borderless is most organizations, like 50%, there with compliance, as we've seen with the polls, that most people feel somewhat confident or somewhat okay with the thought of their compliance and a potential Home Office audit and visit. However, we always find gaps, but typically within 90 days, we bring companies' compliance scores from 55% up to 95% with Borderless. And don't just take our words, Christian Ery at Wessex Care, just saying that if we ever did get one of those compliance checks, he knows everything they will ask for is on Borderless. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We've now just got a few minutes for Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We've got Alina, our immigration specialist here. We've also got some links and QR codes on the screen to some other resources that we have completely for free for you to use. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions in the chat as well.
There's a question here from Caroline. So if in the past, when new to sponsorship, you did not do a right to work check for one worker until they've already started employment, but since then you've done them all correctly before employment, what would happen during an audit? So I will say with this, it's really important to show the Home Office that where there's been a mistake in the past, you are aware of how to conduct these right to work checks moving forward. So I think with this, the Home Office would be more lenient if you're able to show that there is one worker who was done non-compliantly, but ever since that mistake, you are aware moving forward that for British workers and also migrant workers, that right to work checks would need to be done before employment. So I would say you'd be able to show all of your files, basically showing that, whilst one is non-compliant, every file after that has been compliant. And I think the Home Office would take a more lenient approach towards that if you've shown that you've corrected the mistake previously, basically.
Cool. I just see a question, Lauren. So we don't share the slides, we share the recording of the session. So you can watch the recording of the session at your own speed. But most of the slides obviously build upon and adapt from our checklists on our blogs, which are always readily available. So if there was something you wanted to zoom into, feel free to let us know and we can send you the relevant checklist or like 2 or 3 pager.
Here, so there's a question from Catherine. If you miss a visa expiry date with a share code in place, what's the best course of action? Is it better to let the Home Office know by email for transparency? So just so I'm understanding correctly, is that where you've missed the expiry date for a worker and that worker has continued working after the expiry date? Because if I'm interpreting that question correctly, that would mean that from the point that the person's visa has expired, you would need to stop them from working completely. So it'd be best to firstly stop them from working. Secondly, conduct a right to work check using the employer checking service. So that is typically a more accurate way to conduct a right to work check whilst a visa has expired, or maybe they have other applications pending as well. With this, I would say depending on the situation and depending how long that worker has been working past the expiry, you should potentially reach out to us so we can give you some more specific advice on that, just because depending on how long it would be, there could be potential implications there. So it's better if you potentially can just reach out to us so we can offer more specific advice on that, Catherine. So for Hazel, follow up on Carol's question. Right to work checks were done manually previously as we had BRPs. Will a copy of the BRP suffice as a right to work check? So where historically you had BRPs or the workers had BRPs, you would still be expected to conduct a check through the right to work check service. So that's where the employee would need to generate a share code to ensure that you have a copy of that paper on file, which confirms the company that conducted the check as well as the date of the check. So where historically that was allowed, the Home Office has changed in recent years, and they are expecting to see that a share code is generated and that you have that copy of that 1-page or 2-pager right to work check that shows the date of check and the company that conducted it as well. Perfect. I think that covers all of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm just gonna stop. Actually, I believe there was one more slide. I think.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, there's a question. Sorry, Will. There's a question from Marina. Which expiry date do we use when we get? Do we run the right to work check online or the one on the cause? So the visa expiry date would be accurate to their e-visa, and usually when you run a right to work check, the right to work check will mirror the visa expiry date on their e-visa. So I wouldn't take the cause start date and end date as gospel, basically. I would follow what's listed on the right to work check because that's accurate. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alina. I think just one ask to everyone here that has found value in today's session. After we end the webinar, there will just be a quick pop-up, a short survey that will take 2 minutes to tell us, what landed and what we could have done potentially better in this morning's session. It really helps us fine-tune and deliver more value on the upcoming ones. But thank you so much for everyone that joined, and a big thank you to Alina for supporting with today's session. Thanks, Prashanth, and hopefully see lots of you in the coming webinars or at the Care Show in October. But thank you, everyone. Have a great day.